Do you know that feeling in your stomach when you're a little excited and a little afraid and you really don't know what's going to happen?
Yes, it's super uncomfortable, but also kind of thrilling. It tends to happen when something big is coming.
It does. So today we're going to talk about making a big change.
The Speakeasy Podcast, real talk about leadership and sanity in the creative industry. I'm Karen Steffel.
And I'm Jen Estel. Managing creativity in business, we probably have an opinion on that.
No prohibitions.
Clearly, we have cocktails.
The Stone Fence. Let's talk about it.
Oh, I like this drink. So it's a very, very simple one. It's got just 3 things: bitters, apple cider, and rum. So easy and so tasty.
Yeah, and you serve it over ice in a Collins glass and top it with a little bit of mint. It's like the cider's a pourin'.
It is, and the thing I like about it, cider can get kind of thick. It's delicious, but not refreshing to me.
Right, you wouldn't want more than one.
Right, but this is very refreshing, surprisingly, for a cider base. So I was delighted when we tried it.
What do you think it would taste like not over ice? What do you think about this? Would this be good warm?
No, but it could be a slushie.
Oh, I'm game for that.
I don't think I would like... Well, no, this could be warm. You could heat this, absolutely. You could maybe swap out the mint for some cloves or something, and it would be pretty tasty.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a very different kind of drink.
That is a different drink.
Listeners, you should try that and let us know.
Yep. All right, so you asked the question, how big, when, and how. What is a big change for you? I mean, is it like changing your pants?
Yeah, absolutely. Deciding what to eat. No, I think a big change to me is something that fundamentally alters your life in a way that you can't easily go back.
Mm-hmm.
So this is
a great definition.
Yeah, it's not like changing to a new house down the street or a neighborhood away, because your infrastructure is still there. It's more like moving to a new city or across the country. Because
your infrastructure is gone, like you said, or, really your support system is there. But you would never move to a new city or a new state without a map, without a plan, right? So maybe there's an element of something that big change needs, right?
That's true. Probably most of our listeners don't go through massive big shifts and changes very often. I don't think something of scale happens very many times in a person's life. Mm-hmm. And for me, I really personally, I haven't had a big change in quite some time, right? My youngest child is 11. I've been married for 23 years. Mm-hmm. Pretty stable. So I've had more big changes over the course of my work career. Mm-hmm. So it's hard for me to think of this in a way that isn't work-based, although that's different for different people.
Yeah, and I think what a big change is defined as is defined uniquely for the person, because it really has to do with, how risk-averse are you? How much do you fear change? Really, do you even define change as something that's big and scary, or are you thrilled by change?
Right. Like you mentioned you wouldn't move to a new city without a map. I know a couple people who would just throw it all up and just do it without a lot of change. That is not me.
That's not me.
That's not my comfort zone.
Right.
So for me, big changes take a lot of planning.
Let's make it really clear for this episode, at least. We're not talking about surprise changes like illness or the death of a loved one, right?
These are
or intentional changes.
Yes, something you would choose to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair. I wonder if some people, one of the things I think about as big changes is that, especially when they are intentional changes, they aren't like light switches. It's not like one day you're in position A and then the next day you're in position B and the change is done. Because again, it's not like moving your house from one neighborhood to another where you can do that in a day. I think of changes, especially big change, as a continuum. And so it's like you're marching forward, ticking things off of your plan,
right?
Marching towards what the goal is. And so that's actually kind of how I frame big change and how I manage the crazy that surrounds a big change, right?
Right. And, for me, when I was thinking about this episode, I move at a glacier's pace when it comes to a big change. I mean, I'm very, very slow about it. And so even before the planning comes the thinking about a change. Mm-hmm. So even deciding to make a big change can take a while.
Do you think it takes longer for you to think on that change and marinate and kind of try it on mentally than it does for you once you've made up your mind? Do you move pretty quick or do you still move pretty slow?
I move a little slow after I've made up my mind, but if I really have to think about it, I wonder if the change actually happens at the deciding rather than at the actual physical doing. So there's really two parts to a big change, right? You have to decide you're going to make that change. Again, these are changes that are not surprises or foisted upon you. You have to decide to make the change, and then you have to enact the change. And so that's two big points, and I think deciding is the biggest point for me. Once I've decided to make the change, everything else is just paperwork.
That's project management.
Right.
Yeah, which we're both pretty good at.
Right. So how do you feel about that? Where does the change feel like it actually happens for you?
I think it's absolutely in becoming both mentally prepared, but emotionally prepared, like making sure that whatever huge change you're going to make, you're ready to kind of bear that burden or weather that storm, and making sure that if you're going to make a big professional change, that your house is in order, that it's not going to leave a big wake.
Right.
Is it the right time? And sometimes it's never going to be the right time. That's right. Like when people say, when is it a good time to have a baby? Like, it's never really that convenient. You just got to go do it.
There's never enough money in the bank. You never have enough time. You're just never ready. You just do it anyway.
Yeah. And so I think that sometimes the thinking about the change is the bigger hurdle, at least maybe for the way that you and I are wired similarly in that way.
Yeah, I think so. So what?
But I want to move fast once I make the decision.
Do you?
I do. I want to rip the Band-Aid off and go, okay, let's go.
Interesting. I think you're probably faster about it than I am. Because when I'm doing the thinking about it, the very, very long thinking process, I will find myself in a random situation like watering the plants and think, how will this look different once I've made that change? Will I still water the plant? Will the plant be by this window? Will I have someone else doing that job for me? So really strange places it pops up for me.
That's really thoughtful. I don't do that.
You don't?
Nope.
Oh, that's funny.
Mm-mm.
And so I do like on both ends of the process to think through those little vignettes of my life and what will they look like and how will they be once my change occurs, which I could be setting myself up for failure. Who knows?
No, it's just I think maybe instead of I think how will your life look different when you water the plant after a change is a metaphor for how you're working out solving problems. That's all.
Maybe that is.
Yeah.
Ooh, we got into metaphor land. I love that. So why even do it? Why make it? Why put it upon yourself to take on the stress and the work of a big change?
Okay, so our last episode was about learning new things, right? And one of the reasons why we learn new things across the course of our lifetime is to grow, right? And so making big change is our way of adapting our lives to get closer to a goal, potentially, depending on what the change is, right? I feel like we're not using very concrete examples, but I don't really want to name big changes because I want everybody to be thinking for themselves what that big change is that they're wrestling with or they're grappling with.
Sure. And I think the message I would like people to take away is really that big changes can be really good and healthy. Mm-hmm. And they can bring you to a whole new level and make you look at the whole world differently. But you have to acknowledge that they're worth it because the work behind it is pretty big, right? So we talked, we glossed over a little bit. Once you've made the decision, do you get through that to-do list easy or hard? Is it fast or slow? The fact remains it's a big pile of to-do. And if you don't do change, you have less work.
Yeah, but you also, I think that the things that are worth going after in life are kind of the big scary things.
Sure.
And so if you hold yourself back and play it safe, to not want the big things, to not go after the big things, then you're prohibiting yourself from experiencing the big thing that you want.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Because honestly, if you don't go after it, you don't want it that bad.
Here's the thing. When it comes to deciding whether you're going to make a big change or not, I would encourage you, look back at the landscape and look forward at the landscape. And if they look exactly the same, is that what you really want? Do you want to keep doing for the next X number of years the same thing you've done for the previous Y number of years? Or do you want to try something new and put yourself in a different position and learn something different and experience some different things?
Yeah. Well, let's talk for a minute about what would hold somebody back, right? Because what you just said reminds me of, do you think of the scary things, the big scary things that you want to accomplish? Do you think about it as running away from something or do you think about it as running towards something?
The big scary things, I think about it as running towards something.
I
personally.
do too. Yeah. I do too. But I think what can hold people back is fear. We've kind of already alluded to that. Fear of failure, obviously, if you're going and making a big change, whether that's starting, a startup or, name your big thing, listeners. But it also could be ego. Your ego can get in the way because you don't want to look bad if it doesn't turn out the way you've painted the picture in your head.
Right. And a lot of that depends on personality. I know my personality is one where I would prefer to look like the expert and prefer to look like I know what I'm doing. So there's a lot of vulnerability in putting yourself out there as I don't know, or this might be different, or I'm not sure. And so that is scary, and not wanting to be in that space could easily prohibit me from making big changes. But you just have to look through the benefit of the change.
Right.
And if you can look forward at, but when I make this change, I get this and I get that, and life will look differently here, here, and here, it kind of gives you the fortitude to get past that ego and fear.
Well, or as you've mentioned so many times, what's the worst that can happen? Define that, plan for that, and then anything else that's bad that can happen is easier than that.
Right.
I always love that, and I reference it all the time.
And, that can happen in a couple of different ways. So if your change might be expensive, plan for it and make sure you have a few extra months of cushion or a few extra years of cushion, whatever you're comfortable with. If it could go very poorly for your business for whatever, make sure you have a crisis communications plan put together. There are lots of things you can put in place and have on the shelf when you make a big change so that if things go wrong, you're prepared and you're ready, which smooths over the scary parts and gives you a good level of confidence.
That's some really good advice. The other question I would ask is, who do you enlist for help? Who do you go to?
Right. For me, I was thinking about that question. And of course, my spouse, I've got a good relationship with my husband, so that's nice. So your partner or your spouse could clearly be that sounding board, probably because the big decision, whatever it is, or the big change will affect their lives as well.
Sure.
Right? I'm lucky to have somebody to do a podcast with, so I can ask her for advice anytime.
You got it. Well, and I think the benefit of that, too, is that then, you've got a balance between somebody who's emotionally invested in your success and somebody who isn't as closely and emotionally invested in your success, who might cheer you on or push you a little harder. And then the sum of that input you get to weigh.
That's true. And for me, I have a set of book club girls, and I'll always ask them about things in a really specific and oblique way, and it's very useful for me, but it's very different than the type of advice I ask from you or from my husband. So you need to know what kind of advice you're seeking, what kind of support you're seeking, and get it from your spaces. When I'm making a big change, I don't open it up to too many people. I don't need a survey monkey of everyone's opinion to decide how I'm going to react, because it's not everyone's life.
You have to also know yourself, and you have to be able to know whether to trust your gut.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but trusting your gut while you've got informed feedback allows you to kind of validate maybe where your gut was going to go anyway.
Yeah.
But at least you also have to know kind of yourself.
Yeah. Which gets back to having some sort of goals, right? If you don't have goals and you don't have a plan, this is a great time to start thinking about it. The new year is just around the corner. Really think what you want that year to look like, what you want 5 years away to look like. Come up with that goal, and it might tell you it's time for a big change.
And there's lots of ways to do that. That might be simply writing a list. Or if you already have the big change in mind, that might look like pros and cons. If you're not really sure, a vision board or some cluster brainstorming might be a great place to start thinking about what does that exciting future look like. So there's a lot of different ways that our brains are wired, and so there's equally a number of ways that we can start really thinking, or even just beginning with some dreaming before we set those goals.
Right. I love that. That's a good idea. And what that leads me to think is you might not know what the changes needs to be, but you might know what end result you're trying to get to. And if you do this kind of planning and imagining, you can figure out what you want your life to look like, and then it might become very obvious where a big change could be necessary.
Yeah. I know I've got a couple planned for next year.
You do?
I do.
Well, and you had a big change earlier this year, too.
Yeah. My business partner of Well, David Such, who has been the owner of Render since Such Video started 40 years ago, David has become semi-retired, and ownership of Render has changed over to my hands. And that succession planning has been in the works for a number of years. And so, but that big change and marching towards it was a big project to manage, and it's still working out some details as well. But yeah, that's a huge change.
How long did it take for the two of you to work through that change? Just the logistics of it, not the emotion of it, because it's probably two different things.
Well, it's just like those decisions. It's like you have to get through the thinking of it before you get through the project management of it. And it's taken a year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Maybe a little more.
The message we can take from that is a big change does not happen in a short amount of time.
It's a continuum.
Mm-hmm. There are emotional opportunities and there are logistical opportunities. So it's,
you have to solve for both things.
X and Y.
For sure. There's a lot of X and Y.
Yeah. So I think what I would just encourage is, I think it's useful to think big thoughts and think what if thoughts and what big changes look like and how they would happen and why they should happen in your life. And so if we can maybe spur one or two people to decide to do that and really look at the new year in a fresh light, that would be great.
I want to hear more about what people are planning.
Well, I want to hear what you're planning.
I'll tell you.
And one change we might make, that's a small one, is trying this drink warm instead of over ice, even though I do like it icy.
I do like it over ice, but, as we continue to experience crisp temperatures, apple cider is really, really good cold, but it also is lovely warmed up, and so I think you could tweak this recipe and enjoy it either way.
So you should check it out.
Thanks for sharing a drink with us.
You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Easy Underground, or on our website, thespeakeasypodcast.com.
What are you interested in talking about next time, Jen?
Well, I'm wondering, do you make the time to let your mind wander and explore?
Like making the time to do the things that bring you mental refreshment? That sounds like it's a beverage.
It does sound like it's a beverage. And what that looks like is really different for every person. But what it boils down to is making time for creativity.
And that's what we're talking about next time. Join us.